finds nothing of, says Nasiruddin. So the question to ask of experts, or a general question to ask, is why was the customs official, or even many of you here, unable to see the donkeys? The answer to the problem that he was trying to solve was right there in front of his eyes, day after day, not just one donkey, many donkeys, and I said donkeys so many times. Customs official was unable. And this is a phenomena that is rampant. Some people call it trained incapacity. You are incapacitated by your own training. Some people call it bounded rationality. Your rationality is bounded by what you know. Some people call it occupational psychosis. Too often, the answer that we are looking for to solve a problem is right there. That's the first principle of positive deviance. We just do not have the eyes to see it. And what gets in the way is us. But if you flipped your mindset, there's a possibility for you to see the donkeys. And how to see the donkeys, story 2 and 3 will help you. But what lessons do we get from the Nasiruddin story about the premise of the positive deviance approach? The premise is solutions to complex problems exist, complex problems like child abuse, child neglect, child welfare. They stare us in the face. The solutions stare us in the face. We do not see them. We are actually incapable of seeing them. We don't even know where to look. And old problem-solving mindsets get in the way. Okay, story number 2. You're with me? You got the first story? Solutions are there. Expertise gets in the way. All right, okay. Anybody recognize anybody here? Yes? And you recognize?
Jerry.
Yes. Anybody in the picture you recognize?
Oh, Mother Teresa.
Mother Teresa. Well, there are so many other people. Let's see if you can see this person smoking some marijuana right there. What is it about us that we see Mother Teresa and we miss everything else? Of course, there's Mother Teresa, so we should talk about Mother Teresa. Here's another Washington story, and this is a quest to see where the donkeys are, right? So the question is, how do you see the donkeys? So in 1974, Mother Teresa arrived in Washington, D.C., Dulles Airport, Arrivals Hall, hoping to be greeted by 2 sisters from the Missionaries of Charity. And when she arrived in the arrival hall, there were about 800 people with placards and images of her, sort of swaying and like, oh, Mother, we are so happy you're here. Somehow they found out. I mean, in Washington, information leaks, I believe. So, this was important information. And, people, there's a representative walked up to Mother Teresa and says, Mother, we are so happy you're here. Tomorrow we are having a march in Washington. We hope you will march with us. And Mother says, my child, what is the march about? And the representative says, tomorrow we are having a march in Washington against the Vietnam War, and we'd like for you to march with us. And there's silence. And so he says, so you will march with us, right? And Mother says, oh, I'm so sorry, my child, if you're going to have a march in Washington against the Vietnam War, I'm so sorry. And then there's somebody from behind, like, why won't she march with us? There are 800 of us here, and it's going to be 500,000 people or whatever. We're going to be marching. We want her to march with us. So, Mother, why wouldn't you march with us? And she says, my child, if you're going to have a march in Washington against the Vietnam War, I am so sorry. But, my child, if you were to choose to have a march in Washington for peace, I will be the first to lead. So being against the war and being for peace, one and the same thing in Mother Teresa's mindsets, or a little different? Different. Too often, as problem solvers, we are almost always against things. Why? Because you are trying to solve a problem, which means you are up against something. The very definition of a problem is I'm against child neglect, I'm against child abuse, I'm against sexual discrimination, I'm against racial discrimination, I'm against teenage pregnancy. And that's okay, there's nothing wrong with it, it's one mindset. What Mother Teresa is telling us is because of being against, too often we begin to look at the deficits. What's not working? What are the gaps? Whereas she's also saying, through this story, that what if we defined our work with respect to what are we for? Strong and thriving families, child well-being. Because if you focus on what you are for, you will be at a different place. And by corollary, if you are against something, you're looking at the gaps and the deficits. If you are for something, you begin to look at what are the assets, what are the strengths, what's working. You with me? So one way of trying to solve a complex problem with a flipped mindset is to ask what's working. What are you for? Okay? You ready for story number 3? Anybody recognize? Yes? Mahatma Gandhi? And we know that Mahatma means great soul, wasn't his first name. And I don't know if you can see, but he's traveling a certain class of service. And what class of service is that? Is he traveling first class? Not even second class, he's traveling third class. So here's the father of the Indian nation, he called him Rashtrapita, who traveled third class. And you can imagine people of my parents' and my grandparents' generation, I'm the first generation of Indians to have been born in a free India. Parents and grandparents would say, Bapu, father, why do you travel third class? You know, we as a country can do better. We know when the president takes his plane, it's Air Force One. When the chopper rises, it's Marine One. Yeah? First Lady, one, first. Here's the father of the Indian nation traveling third class. So people would say, Bapu, father, why do you travel third class? And his response always was the same. I travel third class because, as you know, there is no fourth class. Now, when I was flying from El Paso to Washington, D.C., I must confess, you know, when you go through the line and you have an electronic boarding pass, and sometimes you got to put it under one of those shining lights and hope that everything would work okay. And it beeps, and it's like, okay, I'm sorry, what happened? And she said, oh, sir, nothing to be sorry about. You've been upgraded. And you know how it feels, especially if you're traveling with colleagues. Your whole demeanor changes. There's like me, Moa. And if you go from seat 33F to 1A, and even before you sit down, you're asked, what is it that you'd like to drink, sir? And you throw in a vodka martini. Shaken, not stirred. And of course, you got to Instagram it, right? Because have you really traveled first class if there's nobody who knows you've traveled first class? That's the way we work. That is our mindset. Nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong in saying you're 5'9". There's nothing wrong in saying I'm against this. What we are saying is if you look at the common ground, if you look at what you are for, and if instead of our natural instincts of upward mobility or best practices, we are so obsessed with best practices. What Gandhi is saying is, if you can look at what's working, so you're combining Mother Teresa and Gandhi, if you can look for what's working for the fourth class, the one who faced the highest odds, you will know where to look for donkeys. Okay? So keep these three stories in mind. I'm going to give you an example very quickly. 1990, Vietnam, 65% of the kids were severely malnourished. And for the first time, they asked a question to apply the positive deviance approach. And you'll see Mother Teresa in this question, and you'll see Gandhi in this question, and you'll see Lincoln in this question. The question was simply, are there children under the age of 5 from the poorest of the poor households, the fourth class, who were well-nourished? So it was a data-driven exercise. They started work in 4 communities. They found a handful of kids, 24 kids out of 3,000 in these 4 communities. That's less than 1%. And for those of us who do quantitative work, we know about p less than equal to 0.01 being the happiest state. You're looking at positive outliers, those who have solved the problem against all odds. And if they've solved the problem against all odds, you know the answer to solve the problem are there in the community. They are there. And those answers have been there for a long time, so what did we find? These were the questions. Are there well-nourished children among the poorest of the poor? And if so, what uncommon practices were there? And the answer of the uncommon practices were, there were some mothers who were adding the shoots, the greens of sweet potato plants. What do we do with the greens? How many of us have even seen greens of sweet potato plants? We throw them, or use them as fodder, or as animal. No, or compost. Some mothers were taking the greens and adding them to the foe. Some mothers were bending down in their rice fields and picking up these tiny, teeny, tiny shrimps and crabs and shellfish, which was considered duck food, and chicken food, would come back home, peel, and add that. So the answer to solve the problem was right there. And a few other things. And then all this was, you can say, amplified in Vietnam over a period of 8 years. And this program then spread to over 20 countries. In Vietnam, 2.2 million people, including 500,000 children, improved their nutritional status. That's the positive deviance approach. Ask what's working for those for whom it shouldn't be working. I want to give you another quick example. You know this. Okay, this is important. I'll just keep this slide for 10 seconds. From the Vietnam case, you can look at, what implications it may have for the kind of questions you can ask. Are the caseworkers who reunify families despite heavy odds? What enables them? Are there families that are least likely to get their children back, but they do? What enables them? And I'll end with this. There was a piece of work that we did in Danish prisons, me and several colleagues from Denmark. And we looked at prison guards who were absent a lot, who had very high turnover, who retired early, had a lot of violent acts committed against them. So the question that was asked was, are there guards in maximum security prisons, those who face the highest odds, who were psychologically resilient, who were rarely absent, and who had very few violent acts committed against them? And again, there were a handful, 8 out of 400 guards in a maximum security prison. And then you ask the question, what enabled them? What were the uncommon things that they did? And you figure out that, well, one of the guards had made a pact with himself. One of the guards had made a pact with himself that he would not read the dossier of those who came in. And you can imagine what that did. No? If you don't know who's here, then, well, maybe you don't judge. And if you don't judge, then perhaps how they respond to you is different. One of the guards had the habit of giving the prisoners a tour. As opposed to taking them and locking them in their cell, he would say, well, here's your gymnasium. You like to play soccer. I was a goalie. You can, hit some shots and I'll try to. One of the guards jingled their keys as they walked up to the prisoner's bar if the prisoner had asked to go to the restroom, knowing that, I'm coming for you right away, as opposed to waiting for a long time, which was normative practice. And these ideas were observed, and then they were amplified, and within 6 months, violent acts were down by 40%. There are lots of implications for child welfare caseworkers. You may also, and I'll leave the slide presentation here, you may ask, where are the other donkeys? Are there parents who struggle with substance abuse? Are there parents who have a diagnosis of a mental illness? Are there communities that against heavy odds are able to keep their kids safe? So my assertion is that there are hundreds of positive deviants, parents, families, child protection specialists, social workers, law enforcement, and many of you here in this room, hidden from plain view. The answers are here. Steven Spielberg once said that the camera denies the existence of what it does not see, which also means that the camera accentuates and animates what it chooses to see, which means our mindsets, the lenses we use, are absolutely critical in terms of how we view the world. Thank you very much.
Please welcome Elaine Vosestedt, Director of the Office on Child Abuse and Neglect in the Children's Bureau.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Singhal. Thank you, Lynn. And thank you, Jerry, for your inspiring thoughts and thought-provoking messages for all of us to consider as we take the messages that you shared with us. I want to add my warm thanks and sincere gratitude for all of you in joining us at the 21st National Conference on Child Abuse and Neglect. There are some 1,400 of you here in the ballroom with us today in Washington, D.C., as well as over 500 people who are joining us via live stream. I'm so pleased that so many of you have taken the time out of your important schedules and work to join us in these vital conversations. My role today is to share with you some logistical information so that you have a successful participation in the NCAN. I want to call to your attention the NCAN mobile app, which is available to download on your phones, your laptops, as well as your computers. In addition to providing comprehensive information on conference offerings, you can access presentations as well as handouts from the app. We also have Wi-Fi for all conference participants. If you need access with anything to support your participation in the conference, the staff at the registration desk is happy to help you, and I encourage you to visit them. I also want to thank you for letting us know when you registered which sessions you preferred to attend. It was incredibly helpful for us as we planned the sessions. Please note that the sessions preferences that you shared with us is not a guarantee in terms of your admittance to the sessions. Seating for all sessions is on a first-come basis, so you should plan to arrive early and to make sure that you get a good seat. In addition, in some instances, sessions have been canceled due to a variety of reasons where presenters may not be able to join us here. And so the mobile app has the most current session list, and I would encourage you to review the conference app so that you can choose an alternate session if necessary, and to also refresh the app periodically while you're here. And speaking of conference planning, I need to give an incredibly big thanks to Rosie Gomez, who is a child welfare program specialist here in the Children's Bureau, Office on Child Abuse and Neglect, for her outstanding leadership in planning the NCAN in collaboration with the Impact International team that has provided the logistics for the conference. Planning a conference of this size and complexity takes many hands, lots of hours, and Rosie and the Impact team have been invaluable in their humor, grace, and expertise. Over the next few days, you will have the opportunity to participate in many different sessions. The conference program features more than 200 workshops, skills seminars, policy forums, spotlights, poster sessions, and exhibits. The 9 plenary sessions and master sessions will be live streamed and recorded. We're thrilled to also offer a sneak peek at a new film called Broken Places, which will later be featured on PBS, which follows the lives of several young people and explores questions as it relates to adversity and resilience. This conference has a rich history dating back to 1976. And when I think about those who have stood on this stage before me, those of you that are here now, all of you add value to the rich history that is a part of this ongoing conference. And I am just humbled by the opportunity to be here with you, whether as a participant or as a speaker. All of you are now a part of the history of the NCAN. Your time this week is important. What provides incredible value, what really matters, is that if what you learn here makes a difference when you go home. So the messages that Dr. Singhal shared with us are incredible to think about as we move forward. Over the next few days, I encourage you to ask yourself questions. Start with questions that address the knowledge gaps that we know are there. What needs to be done differently in your program or in your community? What steps can you take to help make a change happen? We are all hardwired for a desire to fill knowledge gaps. Use this time here to network, be curious, ask critical questions that need to be asked and that are tough. No matter your role here as an advocate, as a researcher, evaluator, or as part of the child welfare continuum or a community-based partner, there are steps that each of us can take to transform the child welfare system. We can all make a difference. On behalf of the Children's Bureau and our leadership and the Office on Child Abuse and Neglect, I hope you will take full advantage of all of the opportunities that the NCAN has to offer to build new ideas, to share with colleagues who share your passion. And I think it's also important just to recognize again that this is National Child Abuse Prevention Month and that we are all here building on the legacy of the work that we do together. And most importantly, as a part of National Child Abuse Prevention Month, that we take the time to re-energize and recommit to the vital and critical work that all of you do on an ongoing and daily basis. For those of you who are joining us online or those who are here in person, I hope that you have a productive week and make new connections. And to quote one of my favorite radio personalities, be good, do good work, keep in touch, and thank you for joining us.
Ladies and
time to begin? Yes? Okay. Welcome, everyone. My name is David Kelly, and I'm quite pleased to welcome you to this session on behalf of the Children's Bureau. It's a session that we are very excited about, and it's a session that we are holding unapologetically to advance something that we think is critical. And that's that all children and all parents involved with the child welfare system should have high-quality legal representation at all times. We believe so critically in this that we recently changed policy that will, for the first time ever, make federal funding available to help with the costs. I'm incredibly honored to share the stage with 4 child welfare leaders. They're leaders in their localities, they're leaders in their states, and they're leaders nationally. They're here because we unanimously agree that if we're serious about addressing some of the most difficult challenges that leave families vulnerable for involvement in the child welfare system, and if we're serious about improving the experiences for parents, children, and youth who are involved in that system, we must have high-quality legal representation for everyone. We're going to talk about why. We're going to talk about what that looks like. But we're going to begin by getting to know the folks that I'm so honored to share the stage with. So I'm going to ask everyone to introduce themselves. I'd like to begin here at the end.
Great. So my name is Vivek Sankaran. I direct the Child Advocacy Law Clinic at the University of Michigan Law School, where my students and I represent both children and parents in the foster care system. I started my career here in Washington, D.C., representing children in foster care, then transitioned back to Michigan, where now much of my work focuses on really strengthening protections and procedures for all families, kids and parents involved in the child welfare system, with the hope of promoting better outcomes in the system.
And I am Sharonda Sullivanoff, and I am contracted with the Washington State Office of Public Defense as a social service specialist. Sounds like there's some Washingtonians out there. And I also do a lot of work with birth parents on advocacy on a state, national, and local level. And I'm on several committees all around preserving birth parents' rights and elevating the voice of our families that want to be reunited and together.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Edwina Richardson Mendelson. I'm a grandmother, a mother, a daughter, a spouse, a colleague, hopefully a friend. I was a lawyer representing parents and children in child welfare dependency cases in New York City. I was a judge presiding over those same types of cases involving child welfare proceedings in New York City. I was judge in charge of the family courts in New York City, and now I'm a statewide court leader overseeing justice initiatives for the state of New York.
Hi, so I'm Mark Cherman. I'm everything that Judge Mendelson was in their opening. Plus, I am the director of Allegheny County's Department of Human Services. We're an integrated department. I've been there 23 years. And Pennsylvania is the state supervised county administrative system. But before that, I was in New Jersey as an assistant director in the statewide system for over 13 years. So I've had quite a bit of experience in doing this kind of work. And what I've seen over and over again, a strong functioning child welfare system, it's only strong if you have really strong representation for everybody, for the child, for the parent, and for the agency. And it's so important, and we'll talk about that more.
Thank you, everyone. I want to be incredibly transparent here and say that our clear purpose and intent is to have everyone who views this see legal representation as a moral and ethical imperative to ensure that the voices of parents and youth are heard at all times, to help with engagement, and to make sure that everyone experiences a system in a way that feels just, fair, accessible, one that's designed to truly help make sure they get what they need to thrive. So, question number one. We'll begin here in order again, and then mix it up a little bit. Vivek, in 5 words or less, how important is legal representation for parents and children?
So my 5 words would be,
I think you just used them.
I just used them. Essential for dignity, outcomes, and justice.
Essential for dignity, outcomes, and justice.
It's 5 words.
5 words. Sharonda?
My 5 words are justice, equality, support, guidance, and accountability.
Judge Mendelson?
I've got one word, and it's a word that I'm going to use like the young people use it these days, and that's everything.
Mark?
5 words is a challenge, so I would just say it's critical to have checks and balances in our system, and strong representation on all sides gives you those checks and balances.
Thank you. I'm curious to hear on a personal level from each one of you, what made you realize that parent representation in particular is so important? Let's start with Mark.
Okay. Well, when I was a young worker, I really didn't think too much of parents. I really kind of blamed them for the problems that kids had, and really was pretty punitive, which I think a lot of our workers and systems tend to be. As I got older and more experienced, as I had children of my own, I came to realize, and as I spoke to parents, I came to realize that a vast majority of our parents love their kids. They really want to do what's right for their kids. They may have stresses like disease of addiction or mental illness or poverty-related stresses that get in the way. But if you can give them an opportunity, and if you can, it really does make an impact. And I found by really giving strong representation to parents, it empowers them, it engages them, and it really helps the system to help them get their children, keep their children first and foremost, get their children back with appropriate services so they can do that and get to permanency.
Judge Mendelson, what made you realize the importance of parent representation?
So I have had the luxury of working in a jurisdiction where parent representation in child welfare cases is a mandate, and it's provided and it's assumed. So the idea of parental representation in these most important cases is not something that is a place where I had to arrive. However, I don't take for granted high quality parental representation. We cannot assume that just providing an attorney to parents and to children who are involved in the child welfare system is a fix for the woes that family may be experiencing in our system. High quality representation is different than merely providing representation.
Couldn't agree more. We'll spend some time talking about what quality means. Sharonda, what made you realize the significance, the importance of parent representation?
Well, for myself, I've had kind of a twofold experience. I've had the consumer experience and then the professional experience. And I have to tell you, on the professional side, from the purview of working with distressed parents, I have firsthand watched the power of really good legal representation and how it really moves a case. So that parents actually feel empowered, they feel guided, they are instructed and informed. And so, I'm in this work for personal motivations, particularly because I know that parents deserve the ability and the possibilities to arrive at their rightful place as mom and dad. And so as I've been able to witness the power of what legal representation actually holds, parents really thrive with having that. So personally, it has really empowered me to know the power of what it looks like to have that level of support. Parents come into the legal system or into the child welfare system with an understanding of what a legal representation looks like, and that's probably due to prior exposure. And I have to tell you, that's not the type of legal representation that they're encountering. They're encountering attorneys that are very invested in their families and their outcomes, and they constantly display that, whether that be in the courtroom or whether that be in departmental meetings or one-on-one. It is foundational. So I am a huge supporter of that. And to be honest with you, I'm somewhat baffled with the idea that that is not occurring. And when I was told, I was somewhat appalled. So,
Yeah, as we sit here today, there are parents who may have been separated from their children last night, maybe even during this conversation, who are confused, scared, overwhelmed, and about to be involved with a complex, highly complex legal proceeding without an attorney. Vivek, what was the moment that made you realize the significance of legal representation for parents in particular? I know you work and care deeply about both.
So I think what's interesting about the framing that you just gave about sort of the reality that parents are about to experience this moment is how frequently young professionals in the field don't get that perspective. And I was one of those. When I started working at the Children's Law Center here in Washington, D.C., back in 2001, I entered this field to help kids. I didn't think about parents. I had assumed that they had done something so bad that I really didn't need to engage with them. And then I had this moment in 2004, and a phrase that I've recently sort of clung to is this phrase, moments of obligation. Right? These rare moments in your life where something happens after which you feel such a sense of injustice that your life dramatically changes course in a direction that you would never have predicted before you saw that injustice. And for me, that was having the opportunity to represent a parent in juvenile court. So I had spent 3 years in DC representing children. I was, I think, well liked in front of my judges. I was always treated with respect and dignity by all the parties involved. And then one day, one of my clients in a private custody case found out that Child Protective Services had filed a petition against her because she had left her 13-year-old in charge of caring for her younger children while she went and did laundry out in her Section 8 housing community. Total bogus case. I thought very naively that I could just go to court, explain this to a judge, and get this easily dismissed. And I can still feel to this day, and it's been, almost 15 years, how I felt in court that morning. And the look of my client and the fear and the isolation, the embarrassment, the humiliation, and I as a lawyer, and how alienated I felt by just being someone who's to stand up for this parent. I had never seen the child welfare system through that lens before. And so for me, at that moment in time, I realized that we will continue to fail as a field until we invest in this. And we can keep doing the same things we've been doing over the years, keep having the same conferences, same presentations, and same panels, talking about the same issues, but we're missing the civil rights issue that no one's talking about. And so from there, it's been, I feel like I'm often on repeat mode, trying to just get audiences to feel what I felt that day, that morning. And I continue to feel sort of that sense of outrage. And it's just, we talk about engagement, empowerment, all of these great concepts, but yet we rarely link it to the one person who has the unequivocal relationship with the parent, which is their lawyer. And until we invest in that, that mechanism, we will continue to struggle with a lot of the things that we're hoping our system will achieve.
Thank you. Judge Mendelson, I have a two-part question for you. The first is there judicial consensus that high-quality legal representation in child welfare proceedings is important?
And I have a two-part answer, and the answer to that first part of the question is yes. I am fortunate to be a member of a number of judicial associations, the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, the National Association of Women Judges, the International Association of Women Judges, and other Judicial Association. So I have met judges from all over the country and all over the world, and I can say with strength and power that there is consensus among judges who are leaders in their communities that our court system deserves, and the people that our court system serves, deserves quality legal representation of both parents and children.
Excellent. Part two is really why. And what benefit is there to the judicial community, to those on the bench, to there being high-quality legal representation for parents and children?
So I actually have a two-part answer to that. Let me start by saying part of my role as Deputy Chief Administrative Judge for Justice Initiatives for the state court system is to lead our court system's Access to Justice program, where we are trying to provide a fair court system for all court users, regardless of income, regardless of background, regardless of special need. And as a system leader, I know that the idea of having a court process involving the essentials of life, like a child welfare proceeding, in the absence of legal representation for everyone who is involved in that court case, that's not access to justice. So it's a justice issue for me. And I think that it's a justice issue for our society. But in terms of the practical impact, as a court leader, the court process is a better process when everyone has a lawyer. Court cases that involve unrepresented consumers or litigants who come to our courts, those cases take longer. You have to explain things over and over. And as a society cost, a court process that's complicated, where you don't have every person in the court providing information to the judge so the judge can make the most informed decision possible, it's just not a good process. So it benefits the court system and society as a whole to make sure everyone has a lawyer.
Mark, I'm curious. You're a child welfare director, an agency director. Why would an agency director want parents to have high-quality legal representation? Isn't that a threat to you in your position?
Well, a lot of folks look at it that way, and if they ever did it, they would see that it's not a threat, but it's actually a real benefit to do that. When I first came to Allegheny County, the solicitors were kind of in charge, the county's lawyers, and we had very weak representation for parents and for children. And we had about 3,300 kids in care, and they stayed forever. And when you finally went to terminate parental rights, parents never appealed because we beat them down. We just got rid of them that way. And, you know, it's really a dysfunctional system. So I'm the one who's in charge of funding. You know, Pennsylvania's kind of weird that I actually fund the guardian ad litem's and the parent representatives as well as the solicitors. And I made a decision I am going to get good quality representation. So I started really increasing their funding, and what they asked for and what they needed to be professionals, full-time lawyers who actually, you know, worked on this thing and actually got caseworkers with them to help manage those cases, so they had equal representation to our solicitors and our caseworkers, and there was a ton of pushback. And I had to really fight some wars with, you know, the people, the elected officials and everything else, because my solicitors, well, we got to win. And, you know, my thing is you don't get more money for winning. We win when children and parents are well represented and they get what's right here. So we changed that focus, and as a consequence, we have, you know, 2/3 less kids in care. We move things much quicker. Parents are engaged, and they have equal standing. And, you know, as Judge Mendelson said, you know, we have the same in my courts. The judges really appreciate having strong, competent representation on all fronts. You know, it's 3 legs to that stool, and you can't have, you know, it being unbalanced. You've got to have everybody, and then the judge can make the best call because they're getting really good information. And you move kids quicker to permanency, you get kids quicker home, you know, parents are engaged. I mean, it really does work. So I would say to my colleagues, try it. You know, it really does work well, and it'll save you money. If you're worried about the expenditure, that early expense will actually save you money in reductions in placements.
So you not only don't see it as a threat, It's something you actively sought to create.
Right?
You did it long before 4E funding was even available
Yeah, 23 years ago.
23 years ago. And you see it directly linked to reducing numbers of kids that come into care, length of time they stay in care, et cetera.
And keeping parents involved and trying to help them. And then the flip side is if a parent is too, cannot get it together, you get the diligent efforts pretty quickly.
Yeah.
If parents are in spite of having really good representation and all the resources, and if they can't manage that, we're under time limits, and you get that documentation quicker if that's the case. But more often than not, you help and the parents are getting themselves together to get their kids back.
So value added no matter what the course.
Absolutely.
Vivek, you've represented and still do both children and parents. I want to ask a question in a slightly different frame. How does high quality legal representation for parents benefit children?
So I will say the number one thing that my child clients want if they have to be removed is to go home. That regardless of what has happened that led to the removal, consistently, their top priority is, can I see my parents? When can I go home? And I can say there's no better tool that I can think of in the child welfare system to help a family quickly get back together again than getting that parent an advocate who can help guide them through that process, especially at that initial stage after removal where the parent is hopeless. It's when the system kind of comes bearing down on that family, that they need somebody who can help them navigate that process. And so, I just think the simple test that we all need to start applying when we think about this issue is, what would we want if our own family or our neighbors or our relatives were involved in the system? And none of us would sit here and I want to sort of share a quick story of a colleague of mine at the law school who showed up about a year ago to find a Child Protective Service business card on his door, and it just said, "Call emergency. We need to talk." What is the first thing he did? Right? He picked up the phone and called a lawyer to ask what is this about? Give me information. And so he called me, and I got him to take a deep breath and to call the worker back to ask the right questions. We have to start applying these same tests to our families in the system, because I think our ambivalence towards legal representation reflects in some way a disconnect between us and the families that we serve, and that we're not affording the families that we serve the same sort of rights that we would want if we ourselves were in our system. And so I think we have to bridge that gap, because, for me, the simple test is if my children were in the system, I was in the system, my brother was in the system, I wouldn't tolerate a enterprise that didn't give them a high-quality lawyer to help them guide them through that process.
This is a question for everyone on the panel, and you can compete to see who answers it first. What's the most powerful example you can call to mind of how high-quality legal representation changed the trajectory of a family's life?
I've got a really good one. And it's really to be quite serious. It's impacted me, and I do think about this situation. It's a case that I presided over as a judge. But imagine from the parent's perspective for purposes of this story. You have a 3-month-old who's in distress, and you go to the emergency room with your child. They take your child away, and they're taking care of your 3-month-old, and the doctor comes out and tells you this baby has been shaken and is exhibiting signs of shaken baby syndrome. You're the parent. You've been caring for this child by yourself, along with your husband, of course, morning, noon, and night, and you know this child hasn't been shaken. But that child ends up in foster care, and before me as a judge, long, complicated case. I will tell you there's a happy ending, a somewhat happy ending, because that family will never get the months and over a year back that that child was in foster care. But a high-quality lawyer for that mother found a medical expert. That expert came to court, did a full investigation, quality representation. That lawyer is now one of our finest judges in New York City Family Court. This case happened quite a while ago. I actually pulled the decision and I'm holding it in my hands to read the words that I issued as a judge in this case, dismissing the case because there was no child abuse proven. The medical expert testified that the child had a neurological condition, that the emergency room physician rushed to judgment, saw some signs that would have ruined this family's life permanently had that mother and that child, by the way. The child also had a powerful attorney, all of them presenting evidence to me so I could make the only decision that was appropriate in that case, dismissing that case, returning that child to the child's parents. The Child Welfare Agency did not appeal that decision, so the high-quality work of that lawyer and those lawyers in that case convinced the agency that there was no abuse or neglect. And that's my powerful story about the difference in a life, in a family, high-quality legal representation provided.
And I'll actually answer that question, and I'll actually use my case itself. That, you know, when I was introduced into child welfare, I was in the grips of a very, very severe addiction. And just because you get into child welfare doesn't mean that you quit using. But child welfare continues on. And my attorney was amazing. And what he did was, there was points in the case, because I was absent for the first year, but the case still proceeded. And what he did was he was a presence in the courtroom, even when no one else was there. And at one point, he reached out to my mom and he said, listen, no one's showing up to court. Could you show up? And she did. And I have to tell you that my mom was the catalyst for me to be sitting here today. So while you may believe that I am unworthy of legal representation because I'm not there, what I actually just needed was someone to stand in the gap until I could get well. And I have to tell you, I've had the wonderful opportunity of working with this attorney as a professional. And what's really interesting about him is that what I've learned from him more than anything else is he does quality legal representation for everyone. I've worked with him with people with disabilities, all different races, all different levels, and what he does is the quality that he displays is universal. And really what it tells me is more about him. You know, he does his job not about who I am, but really about who he is. So quality representation can actually be the driver of the outcome, of positive outcomes for people who are informing and guiding and remembering that there actually is a parent there. It's really easy to forget about me because of the judgments that are absolutely riddled on a person. I think that people come into a time in my life when you read me on the piece of paper, it's a snapshot. Most people take that snapshot and then just pretty much say that you can count me out for the rest of my life. And that's just not true. I'm a living, breathing testament of the power of people and their beliefs that things can be different. No one wakes up and says that it's a good day to be a drug addict. No one wakes up and says, I would love to see my children in child welfare. There is something that has gone very, very wrong in someone's life, and I really believe that it's our responsibility to help people get back on track.
And that's a responsibility you help see happen every day.
Absolutely.
Any other?
Yeah, so I'd like to jump in, and I'd like to add a twist, which is, you know, the two examples thus far have been about parent advocacy, and I want to talk a little bit about children's lawyers as well, and the impact they can have. You know, as a law professor, you know, my work is primarily supervising students, and so I'm often the proud parent watching students just shine and do sort of brilliant things in the courtroom on behalf of a family. And I'm thinking of a case, and Sharonda, your point about the snapshot, right? When we get a petition in a child welfare case, it's that snapshot of like the worst moment of a family's life. And it's so easy for all of us to let that define the family in its totality, right? And so we got a petition where it was all the horribles, a prior termination of parental rights for both mom and dad, severe substance abuse, the baby was born, tested positive for drugs, parents were then currently in a methadone treatment, and the department in Michigan often asks for termination immediately. If there's a prior termination of parental rights, it's a practice that we have, and the department didn't want to make reasonable efforts. They didn't want to give the family a chance. They wanted to get this child adopted as quickly as possible. It would have been so easy for my law students in this position of representing this baby to just go with the flow, right? To do what the department wants. All too often, children's attorneys do this, right? They just sort of rubber stamp the decision on behalf of the department, but they didn't do it, right? So they went out and they met with both parents in their home with the permission of their lawyers within days, and they realized that these parents were not defined by the set of allegations in their petition, but instead had made a pretty dramatic recovery in their addiction, had a support network in a supportive housing community of therapists, housing workers, professionals, all things that you would not know if you just read the petition. They went out and got methadone treatment records with the consent of the clients to show the court that the parents were completely compliant with drug treatment. And they worked to put together sort of more sort of experts and professionals that could help convince the court that this was a family that deserved to have their children back. And the moment that I was the proudest that it wasn't the parent's attorney who filed the motion to get these kids back home. It was my students as the children's lawyers arguing on behalf of these parents because it was in our client's best interest to be back home. And I think that the judge was perplexed that he's like, well, isn't this a motion that the parents should be bringing? Why are you all bringing this motion? And it was a great moment of education to say no. Right, as children's attorney, this is what my clients need more than anything else, and we're not going to wait for some other attorney to do it. And it was just one of those moments as a teacher and as a lawyer that I'll always remember, because to this day, this family remains together in Ann Arbor, and we get updates about how well they're doing. And I just think about the other reality that could have existed if we hadn't put the brakes on the train that was speeding towards termination. And sort of the icing on it is now that the student who handled the case is working in New York as a parent's lawyer for Neighborhood Defender Services. And so, again, moments of obligation, right? This was her moment of obligation, that her life was forever changed after this experience, and just seeing the impact that we can have on the trajectory of someone's life.
There's power, so much power in that. And something you said really strikes me, and that's really that the family that most children need is their own. And it can be a children's attorney that helps accomplish preservation, reunification, prevention of the trauma of removal, or it could be a parent attorney that does that. And those interests are maybe much more aligned more often than we might suspect.
And David, if I could just add on, it could also be an agency attorney who
course.
does that. And let's not forget that. I mean, that our system has become so siloed that we think, the parent should get more visits, but that's not my job. That's the job of the parent's attorney to raise that issue. That is just fundamentally like that it serves all of our clients, regardless of if we think it's what the family needs. We shouldn't wait till somebody else does that. In whatever role we have to be pushing those issues.
Couldn't agree more. And I just want to be very clear that when we talk about high quality legal representation, we do absolutely recognize the importance of high quality representation for the Child Welfare Agency, because that is an individual who can exact justice for families. We're a little centered on parent and child representation right now because of the policy change. And we want to make sure that folks out there are aware of that change, aware of what it makes possible, and maximize it. We've used a term, quality legal representation, repeatedly. And I'd just like to hear each of your thoughts about what does that mean? What does quality legal representation look like? Just for those who might be watching who, unlike the good professor to my right here, might spend less time thinking about specifically what high quality legal representation looks like. So, Mark, let's start with you.
Okay, sure. I believe strongly that the folks who are doing this work need to really believe in it, and it needs to be really be value driven. And I try to do that in our system, but also with the lawyers too, that, that you're there for that purpose of best interest of the child and the parent and the system, and that you're really dedicated to doing the right thing. Examples that we've heard, certainly that way. I believe in professionals, full-time lawyers, because I see so often that these pro bono lawyers get, some rotation, they really couldn't care less, and there's really no representation in that. They don't see their parent, who they're representing until they walk in the door. It's really the worst kind of thing. So funding them adequately so they can pay a decent wage. That there's not like it's, so you get at least a living wage, because our lawyers really don't get paid much in this system, much less than the private sector, in the for-profits. And then also funding to have supports for those lawyers, so the caseworkers and things, so they can actually do the kind of work like when Beck talked about his student who went out there, went to the house. I mean, we have, our parent lawyers and our guardian ad litems have social workers attached, so they can go do that, and they bring back the reports and do that whole piece. So it's they work in tandem to really do that. And our lawyers all talk to each other too. It's like there may be adversaries in court sometimes, but more often than not, they're on the same page. And they will talk about what's in the best interest of this family and all that kind of thing. So, so that's what I think is really effective.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. Judge Mendelson, from a judicial perspective, what does high quality legal representation look like? What does it mean?
So when we talk about high quality legal representation, I think about my role as a parent's attorney and child's attorney in the 90s, when we had a foster care population of over 40,000, and it was the crack epidemic. And I was a lawyer representing parents and children, and I will confess that I did not provide high quality legal representation, at least not consistently. I did my best. I had over 100 cases. They paid us so little as assigned counsel that there weren't enough attorneys to go around, and the judges would keep assigning cases to me and my colleagues because we had a right to counsel in our state. So you have to resource the lawyers and pay them so they can do the work of a lawyer, which is to be in a courtroom zealously advocating on every single court appearance date. But more importantly, the role of lawyer is counselor, to investigate, to speak with your client, and to learn from your client, to be able to communicate to the court your client's strengths, and to obtain the resources necessary to serve your client. So it's the role of the attorney as the in-courtroom zealous advocate that's critically important to high-quality representation, but it's also the ability to have the time and the resources necessary to counsel your client.
Shronda, you work with parents day in and day out. How would you describe high-quality legal representation? What should it look like?
Well, I've experienced it on a professional level. I mean, I can tell you the good attorneys and I can tell you the subpar attorneys. And what a good attorney looks like is that they are very invested in their client. They are in constant communication with the parent. They're not just showing up on the day of the court hearing and saying, hey, let's go in the back room and talk for 10 minutes and get prepared. So they are certainly putting in the work hours outside of the courtroom. And I believe that's kind of where some of the key work occurs, is not necessarily in the courthouse, but outside of the courthouse, because that certainly is how we would be most prepared for when you go before the court. Also, the attorneys are asking really, really good questions. They're not just accepting answers from the department, and they are bringing it forth in a very clear and concise manner along with evidence to support whatever claim that the department has made, which I have to tell you makes the department be better, because they're being challenged. And I think that any time that the department is not being challenged, you're not going to produce better workers. I've learned more from my mistakes than I have from my successes. And so the good quality work looks like asking those questions, challenging those answers. And the other thing is really bringing about the strengths. I mean, the department is can be very punitive. It is really geared towards looking at my deficiencies and not really wanting to pull out the positive pieces of me. And good representation talks about what's good about me. And let me tell you what, I don't care who you are. There's always something good. And parents, attorneys, the department, judges, all need to be reminded of that. So I think that legal representation has the opportunity to present that in a way, in a multitude of different meetings, to shine light on what's going well for the parent, and hopefully from that space that we're actually building from that place, instead of saying all the things that are wrong and then just wanting to concentrate on that, but actually exposing some of the goodness and then just saying, you know what, here's what's really going right and here's where we can go next.
Vivek, do you have any thoughts on what high-quality legal representation is?
No, I don't want to sort of repeat things that were said, but I think what I hear and what I feel that is sort of the centerpiece of high-quality representation is the relationship. The relationship between the client and the parent is like what I would highlight as the most important thing that we need to double down on, because that is the sort of the entry point into all of the activities that we're sort of talking that a good lawyer would do. And you can't form a meaningful relationship between a lawyer and a client if all you're doing is showing up at the court hearing and standing next to a parent, reacting to information that you learn of for the first time in that court hearing, whispering to the parent saying, is there anything else you want to say? In that moment of fear, often I see parents just saying no, they just want to get it over with. And then moving on and then not seeing your client for the next 3 months. That is not, we can't even say that's legal representation in any, it's not even legal representation. What we're talking about to form an effective relationship is individuals who will meet with their client outside of court, right, outside of that sort of insanely stressful experience, who will then learn about sort of the complexities and the strengths and the challenges that the client is facing, who will then go out into the community and hear from others about what the client has been doing and collecting that information. And then the heart of the relationship is then telling stories, right? Telling stories to a judge to change that narrative, change that script, change that initial petition that comes in that defines that parent in the eyes of the court. As a parent's attorney, what we're doing is chipping away and trying to show the court that the parent isn't defined by their worst, the worst day of their life. That, as Brian Stevenson often says, each of us is more than the worst thing that we've ever done. And I think that holds true in our world. And the job of a good parent's attorney is to show the court in as much detail and storytelling as they can that there is so much more to the family than what's on that piece of paper.
Couldn't agree more. Sharonda, can you share with us the parents that you work with? How do you think they're typically feeling? How are they typically experiencing court?
Well, I think court, just the way this is kind of a loaded question, so I'm going to try to do my best here. So first of all, I have to tell you that, more times often than not, families of color are going to be on one side, and Caucasians are going to be on the other. Mm-hmm. And from that moment onward, right, I'm already feeling like I am not going to this is not going to be fair. Mm-hmm. And the voices that are heard in the courtroom rarely are asked to be mine. So my voice is not entered into the conversation, and people are always talking about me, and I'm standing right there. Mm-hmm. And I don't think there's anything more worse in life than to be invisible. And then as you're sitting there and you're talking about me and you have the my future with my children at hand, I'm just not a consideration. And I think that that's so counterproductive. I mean, if I'm a part of the problem, I've got to be a part of the solution. And rarely do people look at me as being that. So I think that for the parents that I serve, the first thing I do is I always remind them that no one is more important than your child, and no one than you is more important in your child's life than you. Most parents are feeling that their children would be better served somewhere else, whether they have social and economic statuses that are a bit better, and the way that they present. Foster families are presented in the courtroom. Immediately, people are going and talking to foster parents and not talking to parents. So there's just this incredible environment that is not supportive towards my reunification. But mind you, we sit there and we say primary plan reunification, but the actions are not saying that. And so it's a big uphill battle for parents. And hopefully that there's a parent partner, you know, at the very least, there has to be an attorney. You cannot say that you support reunification and not have an attorney. I just don't believe that. Those two things don't go together. So if we are talking about reunification as a primary plan and on the onset of a court case, there has to be actions that follow. An interesting parallel is that, you know, I'm required to have nothing but action, right? You are asking me to be accountable towards my arresting my deficiencies, but I am in a court setting that doesn't hold itself accountable because no one else is really there to do that. It's by the checks and balances that actually are occurring in a setting that everyone is to be held accountable. We should have no assumptions. And what I can tell you for myself as a parent that's navigated the system and for the parents that I have come across is that I don't think that there's anything more frightening than to have in the forefront a life sentence that you may not have your child. And I think that sometimes that evades people. You know, it is a life sentence when your child does not come home with you.
That's right.
And for the rest of your life, you will wander this earth wondering, if that's my kid, what's going on with my kid, and I don't know where my kid is. So those are the things that are going on for parents that are going through the system.
That was powerful.
Yes.
It's hard to follow that, so I'm not going to try. I'm going to latch on to a couple things that you said. We have a glaring disproportionality problem in the child welfare system. We know that 60%, conservatively, of kids who end up in foster care are there for neglect, not for physical abuse, not for sexual abuse. We know that it's incredibly disproportionately families and children of color that are affected. Shawnda, you talked about being invisible, feeling invisible. Can high quality legal representation help make parents more visible? Can it help make sure that you're seen, heard? And could it be a strategy that finally helps us take on endemic issues like disproportionality when done in the highest quality possible?
You want me to answer that?
I want everyone to answer that. Let's start with Judge Mendelson.
I always start with the judge.
It's training, I'm sorry.
You know, I'm glad you raised that thorny issue. It's the elephant that's a very large elephant in every courtroom in our state. Disproportionality is real, and if we know and believe that high quality representation can make a true difference in our courts, even if it means there will be fewer people children in our child welfare system, fewer children being removed from their parents, that's going to address the disproportionality issue because there will be fewer children of color in our system and families of color. So I think it's our obligation, the moral obligation of our society, it's justice to make sure people are well represented. And even in states like my own, where we do have parental representation in these cases, there is a movement afoot to improve our parental representation. Our chief judge recognized that we have work to do. We have pockets of excellence, but that we can't be satisfied with a pocket of excellence. We need to spread high-quality legal representation throughout the state. And so our chief judge created a commission on parental representation. I'm on that commission, and it's interdisciplinary, and it's led by a phenomenal retired justice, Justice Peters. And I should give credit to my Chief Judge, Janet DiFiore, for creating this commission and focusing her attention on the needs of parents in our system. The interim report has recommended that we strengthen parent representation by increasing what we pay assigned counsel in these cases, in providing statewide oversight over parental representation issues, and improve our system to make it a state cost, not relying on the localities to be able to support parental representation. So these are recommendations, and it's because of the recognition that that thorny elephant in the room needs to be addressed by all of us.
Thoughts from Mark or Vivek on this topic?
I'll jump in. I wish your folks talked to my folks in Pennsylvania, because they don't see it at all, and that's a real challenge. They don't reimburse anything for parents. They reimburse for guardian ad litem, they reimburse for solicitors, but they will not put state money in for parents. And as a consequence, it's really much more difficult to do around that. But I think, the whole thing about disproportionality, it's really much more endemic. It starts from the front door.
Yes.
We don't go out looking for cases, they come to us. And when you have a disproportionate number of calls of people of color, it generates from there. So we look at every step in the system, and are we making an impact to reduce that as we go forward? And I do think, ultimately, strong parent representation and child representation does help to reduce some disproportionality. But the real thing is stopping it at the front door. But addressing, I'm kind of going a little bit further with the whole thing about the financing. It's like, really, it's so unfair, for parents, and that their view is that, well, parents are not important, that parent representation is not important, that we have counties who, just about do nothing at all, or if they do, they round up somebody who doesn't really care, and there's only just a couple of counties, Philadelphia and Allegheny, and maybe a couple others who actually do professional representation and do that kind of work. And it's a real problem, that's not viewed as positive.
Vivek, thoughts and comments on
Yeah.
Shronda's remarks?
I agree with much of what Mark has said. The thing that, and you opened up the elephant in the room, so I'll sort of jump on it, or I don't know the analogy there, but trying to make one. One of the things that shocks me about our field is how complacent we have become about certain statistics and realities, and racial disproportionality is one of them, that we just seem okay with it. Mm-hmm. And I totally get, Mark, your point about there's a million reasons that explain it. But what I fear is that we've just gotten used to it, that we're okay being a country that takes black children, Native children, at a much higher rate than white kids. We're just okay with it. We don't talk, it's not in the mainstream media. It was for a little while, there were some reports, but it sort of died down a little bit. If you think about the criminal justice system, there's a lot of literature and popular reporting about sentencing disparities and all sorts of stuff that have resulted in meaningful change. But we don't talk about it. And we don't talk about it in the context or the lens of a civil rights issue. I get it, there's different solutions. It could be fighting for more resources in communities. But at the end of the day, we should all feel a sense of outrage that if you're black or Native or of other sort of non-white cultures, you just have a higher rate of losing your kids. And we as a field can't be okay with it, right? Let's debate whatever the interventions, but we just can't be okay with it. And at every opportunity we can sort of express our outrage. I feel like we need to be doing it to get others to realize that this really is a civil rights issue that's going unnoticed by many, many people, right? Even folks who are writing about disproportionality in books, and there was a book, the new Jim Crow, but they don't talk about foster care in there because they just don't think about our world through that lens. And so I think that, like any civil rights issue, lawyers play a critical role in addressing inequalities, and parents' attorneys often fight for supports for families and services and access to things that our families often don't get. I also think Mark's point about moving up the continuum to try to get services earlier on to families is a crucial point. In many ways, assigning a lawyer for a parent after a petition has been filed to then start fighting for services and supports for that family is far too late. That if we actually get serious about trying to address these issues, we need someone fighting for these families far before a petition is filed, when there's some sign of instability, where a lawyer could help that family access the resources they need to help prevent Child Protective Services from ever knocking on that door. If we really cared about children, that's sort of the thing that we would do.
So there's no question.
Well, if I could just add to that, it really does lead into the families first piece and prevention, because, we totally subscribe to upfront prevention, so they never enter our system in the first place.
Right.
So if you can provide services so they never get there, that they're helped before they have real issues and before any adverse circumstance for the kids, that's the ideal, is to do that. So changing the financing, the federal financing, and Families First is the first little step, but it's a step and it's significant. So how do we continue to build on that so we get to what Jerry Milner talks about, primary prevention, and funding that, as opposed to something that's evidence-based, that's way down the road, that kids have already been hurt, and now you're trying to keep them in their homes, but you're already in the system. Something's happened.
That's right.
So can we get to it earlier? And I know you're totally there, but that's what all of us really have to advocate for and push that piece.
Yeah, so to take it one step further and to follow your lead, absolutely Family First is a helpful tool. But if we go even further, if we go further upstream to primary prevention, so we're not waiting
That's what I'm saying.
until kids are at imminent risk of actually being removed.
Right.
If we're able to truly invest in communities and make services available that are non-stigmatic, that families can access, like you do, in Allegheny County through your Family Resource
It's all
Centers.
state money, state and county money. And
If
I think New York City does a lot of the same.
New York
thing.
City is an
But-
outstanding example of that as well. But if we
invest that way because it's so important.
Yes. So investing in communities and investing in families, ensuring that there's high quality legal representation, ensuring that people are seen and recognized as the human beings that they are. Taken together, maybe, just maybe, we can finally make some headway on this endemic, long time, wicked problem.
And just to piggyback a little bit off of Mark, I'm just going to shoot for the stars here. Just going to go for it.
Why not?
I would really like to see legal representation pre-petition, because as people are investigating families and gathering all of this information, the attorney essentially has to work through all of that. So, if the opportunity presents itself somewhere in the future and there's a space to kind of have that type of out-of-the-box thinking, that's another really good place where we could look at some prevention as pre-petition legal rep.
So if I can
That
add on to
space exists.
That space exists, right? So for 7 years, from 2009 to 2016, we had a project in Detroit Center for Family Advocacy, where we got referrals directly from our child welfare agency of basically the substantiated cases of neglect and abuse, but the agency wasn't rushing to court to remove the children, but were willing to work with the families. We assigned a lawyer, a social worker, and a parent partner to work with the family and help the family resolve whatever legal issue existed with the family, in addition to helping them navigate the complexities of a CPS investigation process. It was collaborative. It changed how I viewed CPS workers. I usually only got involved after a petition was filed. And so of course, and this is prevalent pervasive amongst parents' attorneys, they all, CPS workers only want to remove kids. Right? You hear that a lot. When the reality is the stats don't bear that out. They actually very infrequently remove kids based on their total number of cases they investigate. And so we worked hand in hand. What I realized is that CPS workers just were looking for tools.